She never spoke while I repaired her battlesuit. Then a single tear changed everything. The suit had taken 3 direct hits from a null-tide scatterburst, and the left pauldron was hanging by a single reinforced cable when she walked into my bay. I was already on my feet before the door sealed behind her, pulling my diagnostic gauntlet onto my right hand, eyes scanning the damage before she had even stopped moving. She stood in her spot, center of the bay, 7 feet of Veil warrior, armor scorched and split, one arm of her suit completely unresponsive from the elbow down, and she just stood there, still as a monument, breathing slow and even, like none of it meant anything. I went to work. My name is Elias Ward. I am a field technician, 2nd class, assigned to the Veil Compact's 9th Forward Unit. I do not carry a weapon. I do not enter combat zones. I fix things. Specifically, I fix her, Commander Siran Veldor, or rather, I fix what she wears when she goes out and tears the null-tide apart with her bare hands. That was 11 months ago when this assignment began. She had never spoken a single word to me, not once. Not a greeting, not a thank you, not even a complaint, when I occasionally had to press hard against a sealed joint to force the compression lock. She stood, and I worked, and that was the entire nature of our relationship. I used to think it was because she hated me. Then Captain Yen explained that Veil warriors don't speak to those they consider beneath acknowledgement, not from cruelty, but from something cultural and old, something about words being a form of binding. To speak to someone is to admit they exist in a way that costs you something. Most Veil never spoke to humans at all. I was used to it by then. What I was not used to, on that particular morning, was the sound of the proximity alarm going off, while I had my hand halfway inside her chest cavity, rerouting a power feed with needle-thin connectors that required my full concentration. The alarm cut through the bay like something alive. She moved before I could pull my hand back. Her uninjured arm snapped up, catching my wrist. Not hard, just firm, holding me in place, keeping me from jerking back and snapping the connector I had just spent 9 minutes threading through a gap the size of my thumbnail. I froze. She held me there for exactly 4 seconds. Then the alarm shifted tone, dropping to the secondary alert frequency. Not a breach, a perimeter ping. False contact in the outer corridor. She lowered my wrist slowly. I finished threading the connector. I thought about those 4 seconds for the rest of the day. She had not looked at me. She had not spoken. But she had known, in the middle of whatever instinct fires in a Veil warrior when an alarm sounds, that pulling my hand back wrong would undo 9 minutes of delicate work. She had known that, and she had acted on it. I filed it away with the other small things I had collected over 11 months. Month 2, she had moved her boot 2 centimeters to give me room when I dropped a compression seal near her foot. She did not look down, she did not pause, she just shifted, barely, and the seal was no longer trapped under 300 pounds of armored Veil. Month 5, she had come back from a sortie with a chest wound. Not deep, but the suit had been breached, and there had been blood on the inner lining, dark and strange-colored the way Veil blood was. I had replaced the lining without being asked. I had cleaned it first. She had not watched me do it, but the next morning, there had been a small object on my workbench that had not been there the night before. A piece of null-tide casing, smoothed on one side, the way the Veil did sometimes with trophies. I put it in my kit bag and never said anything about it. Month 8, I had started humming while I worked. Old songs, the kind my mother used to play on a battered speaker in our kitchen on cold mornings. I did not realize I was doing it until I caught myself mid-verse and went quiet, embarrassed, waiting for her to shift away, the way other Veil did around human sounds. She had not moved. She never moved when I hummed. After a while, I stopped waiting to be corrected and just let myself hum. Month 10, Captain Yene had told me that Siren's suit had the highest operational uptime of any warrior in the entire compact. He had said it like it was a statistic. I had said nothing, but I had thought about the knee actuator on her dominant leg that I recalibrated every 6 days, because her combat stance over-rotated the joint by 2 degrees, something the standard diagnostic software never flagged as critical, but that I knew would fail under sustained pressure if left alone. No one had told me to do that. It was not in my maintenance orders. I just did it because I knew her suit, the way you know a person you have watched move every day for nearly a year. All of that was before the Battle of Corridor 9. The null tide was not supposed to reach Corridor 9. That sector was 3 defensive lines behind the forward edge. When the breach alarm went off, it did not sound like the usual proximity pings. It had a different pitch, the kind that made your back teeth ache. I was in the bay running a routine diagnostic when the whole floor shuddered from something detonating 2 sectors over. Then the combat channels lit up, and everyone started talking at once. I pulled up Siren's suit telemetry on my station. I had set that up quietly in month 3, linking her armor's sensor output to my bay console so I could pre-stage repair materials before she returned from a sortie, saving the turnaround time. It had started as efficiency. Somewhere along the way, it had become something else. Her vitals were high, controlled, the flat spike of a veil. In a fight they are winning. Then the telemetry started telling a different story. Left pauldron, structural failure, knee actuator, stress fracture in the secondary housing, suit pressure in the chest cavity, dropping. The neural feedback harness, the one I had rebuilt by hand in 6 hours in month 9, while 2 compact engineers told me it was impossible to repair in the field, was the only major system still reading fully operational. The combat channel told me why she was losing systems. She was holding a choke point alone, covering a full platoon retreat down the adjacent corridor. The null tide swarm had isolated her position. No veil breaks from a held position. That is not stubbornness. That is something closer to physics, a law they are built around, older than any order a captain could give. I watched the telemetry for 40 seconds. Then I picked up my field kit, slung it over my shoulder, and walked out of the bay. I want to be honest about what was going through my mind. It was not courage in any heroic sense. It was closer to the feeling I got watching a machine run wrong, the specific, quiet wrongness of a system doing its job, but heading toward a failure that could be prevented if someone just got there in time. I am not a soldier. I had no weapon. The null tide swarm was audible from the moment I stepped into the outer corridor, that grinding arithmetic clicking that they make, like a calculation being performed in sound. I walked toward it. There is a certain kind of focus that happens when the problem in front of you is real and immediate and yours to solve. Everything else gets very quiet. The clicking sound, the distant weapons fire, the taste of smoke in the recycled air. All of it moved to the edge of my awareness, and what stayed in the center was the route to her position, the likely state of the knee actuator housing, based on the stress readings and the tools in my kit. I found her at the far end of Corridor 9. She was still standing. The corridor behind her was empty. The platoon had made it through. She was holding the line against the forward edge of the swarm, maybe 60 meters back, and closing, her suit throwing up emergency barriers in the space between her and the tide. Her left arm was completely gone from the suit now, the whole pauldron assembly somewhere on the floor in pieces. She was fighting with one arm and a failing knee, and she had not moved one step backward. I dropped to the floor behind her and opened my kit. I did not announce myself. There was nothing to say. She knew I was there. Her suit sensors were still operational, and she had eyes in the back of her helmet, and she had spent 11 months learning the sound of my movements, the same way I had learned the sound of hers. She did not look back. She kept fighting, and I kept working. The knee actuator housing had cracked along the secondary casing exactly where I had predicted from the stress readings. I pulled a field brace from my kit and fitted it around the housing, working by feel, because I could not see the joint clearly from my angle, and I was not willing to ask her to move. I threaded the tension wire through the anchor points with my fingertips, pulling it taut and locking it off in one motion. The telemetry indicator on my kit's linked screen blinked from red to yellow. 30 meters. The swarm was 30 meters out. I moved to the chest cavity breach. Smaller issue. Pressure sealant. 30 seconds. I pressed the nozzle into the gap in the armor plating and held the trigger down, watching the seal foam and set. 20 seconds. I pulled back. I was humming. I did not realize it until I heard myself. My mother's song, the one about the long road and the light at the end of it. My hands were completely steady. I have thought about that since, whether it was bravery or just that I genuinely did not have space in my mind for fear right then, because the problem was using all of it. The swarm hit the barriers she had thrown up. The sound was enormous. The floor shook. She moved, sharp and precise. redirecting the impact of the front line of drones with a technique I had read in her suit's impact data 100 times, but never seen from this angle. Her fighting style was unmistakable. She dropped her stance low, loaded her right side, and drove forward through the front of the swarm, rather than bracing against it. I pressed myself flat against the corridor wall. The reinforcements arrived 4 minutes later. 2 full compact strike teams coming in from the upper access points, cutting through the swarm from 2 angles at once. The tide broke. It does not run, the null tide. It just stops calculating that the path is viable and redistributes. One moment they were there, the next the corridor was full of smoke and wreckage and Veil soldiers, and the clicking was gone. She stood in the center of it, still, just breathing. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, and my field kit open across my knees, and I looked at the telemetry screen, and all the indicators were yellow or green. Nothing critical. She would need a full repair cycle, 4 hours minimum, but she was operational, and she was whole. I closed my kit and got to my feet. She turned and looked at me. She had never done that before. In 11 months, she had stood in my bay and let me work, and never once looked directly at me. Her visor was fractured across the lower left quadrant. I could see part of her face through it. I had never seen her face before, not clearly. She was watching me with an expression I could not read at all, the way you look at something that has happened to you that you will need a long time to understand. I picked up my kit and said quietly that I would start the full repair cycle when we got back to the bay. She did not answer. We walked back. In the bay, she stood in her spot. I set up the repair station and began from the top, the way I always did, working my way down through the damage systematically. The work was extensive. The left pauldron assembly needed complete reconstruction. The knee housing needed a full replacement, not just the field brace. The chest seal had held, but the surrounding plating was warped and would need reshaping before the next sortie. I worked in silence for a long time. At some point, I became aware that she was not standing the way she usually stood. There was something different about it. The Veil have a posture for maintenance, a kind of deliberate stillness, and she had held it perfectly for 11 months. This was different. This was the stillness of something that is trying very hard not to move because moving would mean acknowledging something. I was working on the chest cavity, standing close, because the upper ceiling track required reach and precision, and my face was near the level of hers, and I saw it without intending to. A single tear, running down the left side of her face, through the fractured visor gap, catching the light from the bay's overhead panels. I stopped. Just for a moment. I looked at it. I did not say anything. I did not reach out. I did not make it into a moment by treating it like one. I just saw it, the way you see something true and quiet, and not yours to comment on. And then, I went back to work. But my hand, when I moved to the next section of plating, rested briefly on the armor near her shoulder. Not a grip, just a presence, the way you might put your hand on something solid that you are glad is still there. A second, maybe 2. Then I moved on. She did not move. I finished the repair just before the 3rd watch cycle. I ran the full diagnostic, everything green. I started packing my tools, methodical, the way I always did, each piece back in its slot. Her voice, when it came, was low. It had a resonance that human vocal cords do not make, layered somehow, more than one tone at once. She spoke in Veil. I did not understand the words. I had never learned Veil. 11 months, and it had never seemed necessary, because she had never spoken. She said something short, maybe 10 words. Then she was quiet again. I stood there for a second with a torque driver in my hand, and then I finished packing my kit and said goodnight and walked out. I went to find Captain Yene. He was in the operations room, reviewing the Corridor 9 incident report when I came in. I told him what she had said. He went still in a way that reminded me of her. Then he asked me to say it again, in whatever approximation of Veil sound I could manage, which was not good, but good enough apparently, because he sat back and looked at me for a long moment. I asked him what it meant. He said, for a Veil commander to speak to anyone outside their direct chain of command at all was significant. It was a formal act, in their culture, an acknowledgement. He said the specific words she had used, as best as he could translate them from my broken approximation, were something like this. You came into the corridor. I said, that was it? That was the whole thing? He said yes, and then he explained what it meant. The Veil have a classification system for silence. Different silences have different names, different weights, different meanings. 11 months of her standing in my bay without speaking had a name in Veil. It was not the silence of dismissal. It was a specific kind of silence, given to those who are trusted to be present without being acknowledged. The way you trust a wall to hold the ceiling without thanking it each morning. It was, he said, one of the higher forms of silence in Veil culture. Most humans never received it at all. What she had said in the corridor, those 10 words, meant that she had watched me come through the smoke with a field kit and no weapon, and she did not have words for what that was. In Veil, when reality exceeds the language available to describe it, they speak to the edge of it, the nearest border of the thing they cannot say. You came into the corridor was where her language ran out. I walked back to my bay alone. I sat down on the floor with my back against the workbench, and I looked at the empty center of the room where she stood when she came for maintenance. I thought about 11 months of small, quiet things. A boot moved 2 centimeters. A trophy left without ceremony. A wrist held steady at the sound of an alarm. A silence that had a name I had not known. I thought about my father's garage, the way he and I could spend an entire afternoon working side by side without speaking, and it never felt like distance. It felt like the most honest kind of company. 2 people so comfortable with each other that words would have been less, not more. The next morning she was in her bay at the start of the first watch cycle, standing in her spot, suit sealed, ready. I came in, pulled on my diagnostic gauntlet, and walked a circuit around her the way I always did, starting at the left pauldron, checking the reconstruction I had done the night before. The work was solid. She had not missed a sortie in 11 months, and she was not going to miss one today. I did not say anything. She did not say anything. I started to hum. The long road, the light at the end. My hands found the first of the daily calibration points on the knee actuator housing, the one I rechecked every 6 days, the one no diagnostic order required, the one I did because I knew her suit, and I knew what it needed, and that was simply the kind of work I intended to do. Outside, somewhere beyond the bay walls, the compact was preparing for another day in the long war. The null tide was recalculating its approaches. The corridors were being cleared. The strike teams were checking their equipment. In here, there was just the hum of the overhead panels, and my hands moving over familiar armor, and the quiet that had a name I finally knew.